Hi ho, this is Lance Schooler, the Savvy Navigator, and welcome to this Incoterms 2010 series, part 2. And we're talking here about the rationale or the reasons for the revisions. Please be advised that this video is for information and education only and should not be taken to constitute advice. Having said that, let's move on. Now, why the revisions? Well, every 10 years or so, the International Chamber of Commerce does reflect on the current terms and sees if there's a need to change, and they ask for submissions, and there have been submissions, and there's 4 main areas that it was thought necessary to revise the Incoterms, and that is in the realm of global developments. Now, the first one is the customs-free zones. There's been a growth in the number of trade zones and also the number of countries belonging to those trade zones. Now, a good case in point is the European Union, the EU. That has been going for quite some time, but there have been a number of countries have joined the European Union in the last 10 years, and there are currently other countries in the process of applying for that membership. Now, the Incoterms we have don't necessarily work terribly well in those trade zones where there's no customs borders between countries. So it was felt necessary to change the rules to adapt to those circumstances. The second area is in the area of electronic communication. In Incoterms 2000, there'd been quite a number of developments in electronic communications, and what was significant at that stage was a concept called EDI, electronic data interchange. It was a high level, quite expensive form of transferring documents in an electronic format. And in those times, it was basically large companies that would be able to afford the equipment and the expertise to utilise that sort of format. The progression in the last 10 years has taken us to a point now where electronic communication with laptops and mobile phones and other mobile devices has become commonplace and easily affordable to even a one-man band. So the phraseology of the terms needed to be adapted to take account of this new wave of electronic communication. Notwithstanding, there's still the need for paperwork, but it also allows for what developments may occur in the future as well. The third area is some of the changes to transport practices, particularly where there's an integration of transport, road, rail, air and sea, and using a number of those. And some of the terms in Incoterms 2000 didn't necessarily work terribly well with the technologies, and there was some disputes and some challenges there. So once again, it was felt it was wise to revisit those terms and adapt them to that circumstances as it is currently. And the fourth area is due to the events of September 11 in New York and other events subsequent to that, some examples being Bali bombing, bombings in Spain and London, for instance. Governments around the world have been very careful to take stringent action against terrorist activity, and one of those ways is to monitor the transfer of goods across their borders. And so the Incoterms once again, with these developments after the year 2000, required some modification, and so it's taken account of that. So the customs-free zones, electronic communications, the changes to transport practice and security for the movement of goods have all been addressed in these latest revisions. Another area is that some of the terms, we've had 13 terms in Incoterms 2000, and some of those terms weren't used very much and were a bit redundant. I know particularly in Australia, where I reside, the terms delivered at frontier, delivered ex-ship and delivered ex-key were terms that weren't relevant in most of the activities in trading between importers and exporters in this country. Delivered at frontier, we don't have a frontier, we're an island, we're the largest island continent. But so the result of that is that the drafting committee thought it was best to take out the redundant terms and replace those. So what's happened is they've taken those redundant terms and they've replaced them with the 11 terms, from 13 down to 11, and you can see instead of 4 groups as there were in Incoterms 2000, there's now 2 groups, being the sea and inland waterway specific terms, and then the other terms that can be used in any or all methods of transport. So with that, it can be ships and planes and trucks and trains. Now, the other area that needed some updating was the simplification of some of the rules to make it a bit more understandable to people in their common business activities. Also, in some areas there was a bit of ambiguity, and it was felt that the clarification of those terms and the wording would help traders do that more effectively. Now, the other area that I have a particular interest in, I've been running courses on importing and exporting for about 20 years now, and in the last 5 years the percentage of females in my classes has become the majority. So in my classes now there's a majority of women, and as I go through the Incoterms in each course that I run, I have to apologise when I start to go through the Incoterms for the masculine language of the Incoterms. Fortunately, the terms have now been put into a gender neutral, so I don't have to worry about trying to translate as I'm going, showing the Incoterms. So I'm very grateful for that. And ladies in watching this video, I'm sure you'll appreciate it too. Okay, so the next thing is we need to understand that Incoterms is not actually a contract per se. It's rules to help us for the transfer of goods between the buyer and the seller, and those that facilitate that as well. So the first thing is the 3-letter trade terms that we have there in front of us actually reflect what's in the contract. Whatever's been contractually agreed to needs to be reflected by an Incoterm. It's not the other way around. We don't have to meet the contract to fit it in with the Incoterm itself. The Incoterms are there to serve the contractual obligations of the buyer and the seller. The other thing to realise that Incoterms only covers activities dealing with the transfer of the goods from the seller to the buyer. And so there's 3 main areas that are involved. Firstly, the tasks involved, and there's going to be tasks that is the responsibility of either the seller or the buyer or those that they nominate to undertake those on their behalf. Now, the task could be preparing the product or the cargo. It could be packing, it could be stowing, it could be loading or unloading. It could be transfer from one transport method to another, from a truck to a train to a ship to a plane, etc. It could also be lodging paperwork with shipping lines, airlines, truck companies, freight forwarders. It could be lodging paperwork with the customs authority of the exporting country or the importing country, and other government agencies that may have an interest in the processing of that cargo. So the associated tasks in paperwork, in the physical nature of transferring those goods, are things that have to be performed and undertaken by either the seller or the buyer or those that they have represent them. The second thing is, for those tasks there's a cost, and those costs have to be indicated who is going to be responsible for them in the particular Incoterm that is chosen between the seller and the buyer. So the costs are also indicated by the Incoterm, what the seller has to do as far as those costs and what the buyer has to do relating to those costs. The next thing is the risk area. There's a risk in transporting goods, in transferring goods from the seller to the buyer. Goods can get damaged, they can get lost, they can get destroyed. And so the risk is indicated in the Incoterm, where the seller, their risk is up to a certain point, and from that point it becomes the buyer's risk. So those 3 areas of tasks, costs and risks are indicated within the Incoterm that is chosen by the seller or the buyer. So that's the end of this particular video. Our next video will be 10 tips on using Incoterms.